What could Harry Potter possibly have in common with Luke Skywalker, or Neo, or Superman? One grows up beneath a staircase, another on a remote desert planet. One discovers that the world around him is an illusion. Another arrives from another world altogether. Different authors, different genres, different decades. On the surface, they seem to have almost nothing in common. Yet, somehow, these stories produce a strangely familiar feeling. Long before we notice it consciously, they seem to move through the same invisible sequence. An ordinary life that never quite fits. An unexpected interruption. The discovery of a hidden world. A guide who seems to know more than the protagonist. A growing realization that one's life is part of something far larger than it first appeared. No single example is particularly surprising. Writers borrow from one another. Genres develop conventions. Successful ideas spread. Any one of these similarities could easily be dismissed as coincidence or influence. The difficulty is that they refuse to remain isolated. The same sequence appears in ancient myths and medieval legends, in modern fantasy and science fiction, in superhero films and children's literature. These stories emerge from different cultures, different centuries, different religious traditions, and different artistic movements. Their settings have little in common. Their characters often have little in common. Even the conflicts they explore are remarkably different. Yet beneath those differences, something familiar keeps resurfacing. At first, this observation may seem trivial. Human beings are excellent at finding patterns, even where none exist. Perhaps this is simply another example of our tendency to connect unrelated things. But that explanation becomes less comfortable each time the pattern appears again. Eventually, the question is no longer whether these stories resemble one another. They plainly do. The real question is far more interesting. What exactly are they repeating? If these stories are genuinely connected by something deeper than coincidence, the simplest place to begin is with the stories themselves. Consider Harry Potter. He is introduced as an ordinary boy, living with relatives who never let him forget that he does not belong. Then a letter arrives, strange, impossible, repeatedly refusing to disappear. Before long, Harry discovers that the world he thought was complete has been incomplete all along. There is another world, hidden in plain sight, one that has always existed without his knowledge. More surprising still, that hidden world has known about him from the beginning. Now place Luke Skywalker beside him. Luke begins as a restless farm boy on a remote desert planet. His ambitions extend little further than escaping a life that already feels too small. Then, an old hermit enters the story. A forgotten message is discovered. The ordinary world begins to crack, revealing a conflict that stretches across an entire galaxy, and a past that Luke never knew was his own. Then consider Neo. He senses that something is wrong, long before he understands what it is. The feeling has no name, only an unease that refuses to disappear. When Morpheus finally offers him a choice, Neo does not enter a new world. He discovers that the world he has always inhabited is not the one he believed it to be. These are very different stories. One speaks the language of magic, another of space opera, another of science fiction. Yet notice what has not changed. None of these protagonists simply begins an adventure. Each first discovers that ordinary life is incomplete. The adventure begins only after that realization. That distinction may seem minor, but it is worth pausing over. Stories could begin in countless other ways. A hero might simply decide to travel. They might volunteer for a mission, inherit a kingdom, or stumble into danger by accident. Those stories certainly exist. Yet again and again, many of our most enduring stories choose something far more specific. Before asking the protagonist to change the world, they first change the protagonist's understanding of the world. That is our first clue. Whether it means anything remains to be seen. Once the pattern becomes visible, another question quietly emerges. If the protagonist does not discover the hidden world alone, then who introduces them to it? Return to Harry Potter. The first crack in his ordinary life is not magic itself. It is a letter. When the letters fail, Hagrid arrives in person. He does not create the hidden world. He reveals it. More importantly, he knows something about Harry that Harry does not yet know himself. Luke Skywalker follows a remarkably similar path. The message hidden inside R2-D2 leads him to Obi-Wan Kenobi, a man who has been waiting for the right moment. Before Luke has taken a single meaningful step, Obi-Wan already understands the larger story into which Luke has been born. Neo's introduction is different in appearance, but strikingly similar in structure. Long before Neo understands the Matrix, Morpheus understands Neo. He recognizes him, searches for him, and eventually confronts him with a choice that Neo is not yet capable of fully understanding. Once again, the hidden world is not discovered by accident. It is mediated through someone who already inhabits it. The same pattern appears so frequently that it begins to feel almost expected. Gandalf arrives at Bilbo's quiet home. Dumbledore sends Hagrid. Obi-Wan waits in the desert. Morpheus waits in the shadows. Different faces, the same narrative function. The guide always seems to know two things. First, that another world exists. Second, that the protagonist belongs in it. That second observation is easy to miss. The guide does not merely possess knowledge. The guide possesses recognition. Before the hero recognizes themselves, someone else already has. That is a peculiar way to begin a story. If these characters existed only to provide information, almost anyone could perform the task. A newspaper could announce the discovery. A map could reveal the hidden land. A chance encounter could expose the secret. Yet stories rarely choose those possibilities. Instead, they place another human being, or someone who fulfills the same role, between the protagonist and the truth. Why? What does recognition accomplish that information alone cannot? That question will have to wait. For now, it is enough to notice that the hidden world is almost never entered alone. Someone is already standing at the threshold, waiting. If someone already knows the truth, why doesn't the story simply continue? Harry has learned that he is a wizard. Luke has learned that the Force is real. Neo has learned that the Matrix exists. Shouldn't that be enough? If revelation alone were sufficient, Harry would leave for Hogwarts the moment Hagrid finds him. Luke would become a Jedi as soon as he meets Obi-Wan. Neo would accept the truth the instant Morpheus explains it. But that is almost never what happens. Again and again, the stories pause. Harry does not arrive at Hogwarts immediately. First comes the letter, then another and another, until the invitation becomes impossible to ignore. Luke receives Princess Leia's message, yet nothing compels him to follow it. The possibility of another life appears long before he is willing to embrace it. Neo spends much of the story suspended between two worlds. Even when the truth finally stands before him, Morpheus does not command him to accept it. He offers a choice. The pattern is difficult to ignore. Revelation is not enough. Something else must happen before the journey can begin. The hidden world does not simply open its doors, it waits. And so does the story. Why? If the invitation is so important, why is it almost never accepted immediately? Harry does not leap with excitement the moment Hagrid tells him he is a wizard. He is bewildered. Almost everything he believed about himself is overturned in a single evening. Luke's hesitation is even more obvious. When Obi-Wan asks him to come to Alderaan, Luke refuses. He has responsibilities. An uncle, an aunt, a farm. Whatever curiosity he feels is outweighed by the life he already knows. Neo hesitates in a different way. Long before Morpheus offers him the red pill, he spends much of his life doubting his own instincts. Even after learning that another reality exists, the decision remains his. Knowing the truth and embracing it are not the same thing. The pattern appears often enough to deserve attention. The hidden world is revealed, an invitation is offered. Then, almost invariably, something holds the protagonist back. At first glance, this seems like an obvious storytelling device. Delay creates suspense. Every writer understands that. If the hero accepted the invitation immediately, the story would move too quickly. That explanation may be correct, but it may not be complete. If suspense were the only purpose, there are countless ways to create it. An unexpected storm, a missed train, a locked door, a pursuing enemy. Yet these stories return, again and again, to the same obstacle. The hesitation comes from within. The protagonist is not prevented from entering the new world. They are not yet ready to leave the old one. That distinction is subtle. No one chains Luke to the moisture farm. No one forces Neo to remain asleep. No one physically prevents Harry from becoming who he is. The greatest obstacle appears to be something less visible, a reluctance to abandon an identity that has already become familiar. Perhaps that is simply another narrative convention. Or perhaps stories understand something that reaches beyond storytelling itself. Perhaps every genuine transformation begins, not with certainty, but with resistance. For now, that remains only a possibility. The evidence, however, is beginning to accumulate. Eventually, the hesitation ends. Harry boards the Hogwarts Express. Luke leaves Tatooine. Neo chooses the red pill. Only then does the journey truly begin. This moment is often described as entering a new world. That is certainly true. Hogwarts is unlike Privet Drive. The Rebel Alliance is nothing like Luke's quiet life on the moisture farm. The world outside the Matrix obeys entirely different rules. Yet, The change is deeper than geography. Crossing the threshold does not simply place the protagonist in a different location. It changes the questions they must ask. Until now, Harry's greatest problem was surviving life with the Dursleys. At Hogwarts, the question becomes far larger. Who am I within this new world? Why was I brought here? What is expected of me? Luke undergoes a similar transformation. His concerns shift from escaping an ordinary life to understanding the Force, confronting the Empire, and discovering the truth about his own family. Neo no longer wonders why reality feels wrong. He must decide what reality itself requires of him. The hidden world does not merely provide new scenery. It demands a new identity. That may explain why the invitation could not simply be forced upon the protagonist. A person can be taken to another place against their will. They cannot be transformed against their will. Transformation requires participation. The stories seem to understand this instinctively. Again and again, they refuse to move the protagonist across the threshold until some inner decision has been made. The external journey follows the internal one, not the other way around. This observation does not yet explain why these stories share the same structure, but it does narrow the possibilities. Perhaps these narratives are not primarily concerned with adventure. Perhaps adventure is only the visible surface of a different kind of journey. If so, we have been asking the wrong question. The mystery is no longer why these heroes travel to extraordinary worlds. The mystery is why those worlds so consistently reshape the people who enter them. By now, another pattern has become difficult to ignore. The hidden world is rarely discovered as something new. It is discovered as something that has been there all along. Harry does not create the wizarding world. It has existed for centuries before he enters it. More curious still, its inhabitants already know his name. Harry arrives as a stranger to a world that has never been a stranger to him. Luke's story unfolds in much the same way. The Force is ancient. The Jedi existed long before his birth. Even the conflict into which he is drawn has been unfolding for years. Luke is not stepping into a new story. He is stepping into one that began without him. Neo experiences the same reversal from another direction. The Matrix has always surrounded him. The Resistance has already been fighting its war. Morpheus has already spent years searching for the One. Neo believes he is discovering a hidden reality. In truth, that reality has been waiting for him all along. This is a curious inversion. The protagonist feels like an explorer. The story treats them as someone returning. That is not the only way these stories could have been written. The hidden world could have been created by the hero's actions. It could have emerged unexpectedly, as the result of an accident or catastrophe. Instead, it almost always possesses a history independent of the protagonist. Its people have memories. Its conflicts are already underway. Its rules existed long before the hero arrived. The effect is subtle but profound. The protagonist does not invent meaning. They inherit it. Their task is not to construct a purpose from nothing, but to discover the place they already occupy within a larger order they never knew existed. Whether that order is magical, galactic, mythical, or entirely fictional makes surprisingly little difference. The same movement repeats itself. A world already exists. A place within that world already exists. The protagonist's journey consists of bringing those two realities together. Perhaps that is why these stories feel so strangely familiar. They are not fantasies of becoming someone else. They are stories about becoming who one has been without knowing it all along. That is only a possibility. But if it is true, then the recurring pattern we have been tracing may not be about hidden worlds at all. It may be about recognition. At this point, an obvious explanation presents itself. Perhaps none of this means very much. Stories borrow from one another. Every generation inherits the stories that came before it, reshaping old ideas for new audiences. Ancient myths influence medieval legends. Medieval legends influence fairy tales. Fairy tales influence modern fantasy. Modern fantasy influences science fiction and superhero films. Why search for a deeper pattern when influence alone seems sufficient? It is a fair objection. In fact, it is the first explanation that ought to be considered. If one author consciously imitates another, recurring structures tell us very little. They reveal a literary tradition, not necessarily anything about human experience. There is, however, a difficulty. Influence explains similarity. It does not always explain persistence. Why do certain patterns survive while countless others disappear? Every generation inherits thousands of stories, yet only a handful of narrative structures seem to reappear with remarkable consistency. Some ideas vanish almost as quickly as they emerge. Others return century after century, adapting themselves to entirely different cultures, technologies, religions, and artistic forms without losing their essential shape. That is unusual. Consider how dramatically stories differ in almost every other respect. Heroes change, villains change, settings, languages, values, and even ideas of justice evolve over time. Yet, beneath those visible differences, certain sequences remain strangely stable. It is as though the stories are changing their clothes while refusing to change their skeleton. That does not prove the pattern carries psychological significance, but it suggests that influence by itself may not be the whole story. Influence can explain how a pattern travels. It cannot, on its own, explain why that particular pattern continues to deserve passage. Something seems to be selecting it. Whether that something lies in culture, psychology, history, or somewhere else entirely is still an open question. For now, the safest conclusion is also the smallest. We have found a pattern. We have ruled out the simplest explanation. The investigation, in a sense, has only just begun. Until now, we have been looking only at stories. That may be a mistake. If the patterns we have traced belong exclusively to fiction, then they tell us something about storytelling and little else. At most, we have identified a successful narrative formula. But if the same sequence appears somewhere beyond novels, films, and myths, the investigation changes entirely. The obvious place to look is not history, nor religion, nor literature. It is ordinary human life. Consider for a moment the earliest years of childhood. A child enters the world knowing almost nothing about it. The world already exists, complete with its own rules, dangers, and meanings. Long before the child understands where they are, others already do. Someone else knows their name. Someone else knows their family. Someone else understands the house in which they live, the language they hear, the customs they are expected to follow, and the countless dangers they cannot yet recognize. In the beginning, reality reaches the child through other people. Parents point, parents name, parents explain. This is a bird. That is fire. Don't touch. Come here. The child does not discover the world alone. The world is introduced. That observation, by itself, may seem almost too ordinary to notice. Yet, it bears a curious resemblance to the stories we have just examined. There, too, the hidden world already exists. There, too, someone else understands it first. There, too, the protagonist must gradually learn to see what others have seen all along. Perhaps this is only a superficial similarity. Children grow up. Heroes go on adventures. One is psychology. The other is fiction. No serious conclusion should be drawn from resemblance alone. And yet, for the first time, the patterns are no longer confined to stories. They have appeared somewhere else. That is enough to justify the next question. What if these narratives are not inventing a pattern? What if they are remembering one?